I must admit, I feel like a little bit of an imposter because I've never tried coffee. So I'm going to try to bring a little bit more of the agape tonight as you all are enjoying that coffee. Today, the Catholic Church celebrates All Saints' Day. And if you were to ask those men and women what makes them so unique, they would tell you that they are just living a life following God, doing the good, and helping and serving others. I think St. Ignatius Loyola really summarizes what a saint means in his prayer for generosity. Teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward. Over the last month, I've spent a lot of time looking at past agape lattes, looking at individuals who would say they might just be ordinary individuals, but doing extraordinary things. And tonight I want to talk a little bit about the big and small moments in each of our lives that we might feel are ordinary, but that are actually extraordinary when we truly allow ourselves to dive deeper and to pay attention to some of the joys and the gifts that other people bring to us. For me, a few things I find extraordinary might be unique to me than other people. So I think the rat hot dogs are extraordinary and the go-to lunch item. I love to go on a hike in the fall, looking at the foliage with friends, and just being able to spend time in nature. My faith guides me, and it's extraordinary what it's done for me and how it has helped me in some of the journey that I've been in. Or maybe extraordinary things like the tie that I received from a mentor and what that's meant to me. Or a weight loss journey and running and how that's transformed my life. And so some of these ordinary moments or ordinary items turned extraordinary are something that has been very special to me over my life. So like Pat said, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and went to St. Ignatius High School. While I was at Ignatius, I took 4 years of Latin and 3 years of Greek. While I wouldn't say that I really retained much of that information, my LinkedIn would tell you otherwise, and under languages, it says that I know Latin and ancient Greek until like 1453. But I can assure you that's not necessarily the case. And when I was at Ignatius, I would always see this guy walking through the halls, always had the brightest smile on his face, always wore a Brooks Brothers suit with a shirt and cufflinks, and had a tie with the most perfect knot I had ever seen. Dr. Greg Niddle was teaching Honors Greek 1, first period of my junior year. And while I had loved Latin, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to take another language and need to learn a whole other alphabet. But I really had to experience what this guy had to offer because he just emulated pure joy and satisfaction with the individuals that he was with. And so on the first day of junior year, it was 8 a.m., and Doc walked into class, immediately handed out our books, and went up to the board and started writing the letters of the Greek alphabet and teaching them to us one by one. After 3 days, when he was completed the last letter, Doc told us that we should write our names in Greek on our paper. Without having had any conversations with us, Doc looked each of us in the eyes, said our names, and asked us to go to the board to write our names in Greek so he can critique them. And it was at this point that I knew it was going to be quite the year. As the year went on and as those first couple weeks started, Doc not only was a Greek teacher to us, but he also taught us life. He would intersperse little life lessons throughout his lessons that he would teach us, whether it was about hopes, about apologies, about friendships, about athletics, about other types of sports, about how we can be better men for others at Ignatius. You see, it seemed as Doc was teaching us a little bit about life, that those lessons were just as much a part of his curriculum as learning the first 10 lines of the Odyssey in Greek. As the year went on, these life lessons continued, but a couple things did change. The ties started to come off. Doc would soon stop wearing his Brooks Brothers suits and would come to work wearing polo shirts and baggy pants. Occasionally, when Doc would go up to the board to write on it, he would need to take his left hand and place his right hand so that he could start to write. Or occasionally, he would go up to the desk drawer and pull it out and then sit in a chair right next to it. When he would cross his legs, he would make sure that his foot sat on the open drawer so that he would be able to talk to us and translate the Greek. And that continued for most of the rest of junior year. And I had thought as I was going into senior year that I wanted to take Honors Greek 3 with Doc because I really enjoyed the life lessons. And so I signed up to take Greek 2 that summer. And so I spent my summer Tuesday and Wednesday nights taking Greek with a different teacher and not Doc. And as the end of junior year approached, it was clear that Doc had something physically wrong with him. He didn't change his life lessons, didn't change the joy, but you could tell that as an individual, he was struggling. And so I thought a lot about Doc that summer. Was curious what was going on and wanted to check in, but never really chose to check in with Doc. And so as August rolled around, the first period of senior year came, and most of the class was waiting outside the door. Around 8 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and out comes Doc, the brightest smile ever, but he had also lost a significant amount of weight that summer. His shirt was much more loose, pants much more baggy. As he walked to the door, you could tell that he tried his hardest to hold his head up high as his arms dangled loosely by his side. Doc then went up to the classroom door, put the key in, unlocked it, and it took all of his might with both hands to twist the handle and push the door open. What was different this year than the first day of junior year is Doc asked me to hand out everyone's books as he went to sit in the chair, much like he did at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year prior. But what was different this time is Doc couldn't cross his legs. He had to lift his left leg over his right leg. And I noticed that he had a brace. But much like that, Doc opened his Greek book and immediately just started translating the Greek into English for us after a long summer away from teaching. As that September went on, the life lessons continued, but I felt that they were a little bit more deep, a little bit more serious. Lessons on how to find love, how to find future partners, what it means to be a true friend for others, how to ask our dates to homecoming. And one class was even spent on Doc talking a little bit about how he found his true love, his wife, and how eventually he knew that she was a keeper. As September went on, there were some days where Doc would miss class occasionally here and there, and we would have a substitute teacher. And near the end of the month, we learned that Doc wouldn't be returning for the rest of the semester. As November approached, I worked with a teacher at Ignatius to try to find an opportunity for us to go to the Niddles and visit Dr. and Mrs. Niddle. So the day before Thanksgiving, myself, a Jesuit, and 3 friends pulled up to the Niddle house. As we approached, I was really nervous for what we would see and who would be behind the door, and so I made sure that I stuck back and went in last in front of the group, last behind the rest of the group. We walked into Doc's living room. There he was, sitting in a recliner, as skinny as ever, but with a smile that exuded just as much joy as I had ever seen. And I went up to Doc to shake his hand, and he nearly crushed my fingers. We spent that time talking with Doc and Mrs. Niddle, and you could tell that Doc had struggled to talk with us. And so we spent a lot of time with Mrs. Niddle explaining a little bit about what they were up to over the last couple months, talking about their life together, their kids, their family. And as we were leaving their house that day, we had arranged to go visit Doc in January or February, right around his 60th birthday. A couple weeks before we were going to go visit, I walked into AP Latin 4, and my teacher knew that a lot of us were really close with Doc, and knew that we admired Doc. And I could tell that something was wrong immediately when Mr. Gabor started talking. And he said that they had just received a letter from Dr. and Mrs. Niddle, and he wanted to read it to us, and then we were going to spend the rest of the class in silence. And as he fought back tears, Mr. Gabor explained that Doc had been rushed to the hospital a few weeks prior because he had a hard time breathing. While Doc was now resting at home after having had a trach put in, the Niddles went on to say that about 3 years prior, Doc had been diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And Lou Gehrig's disease is a neuromuscular disease that overtakes the muscles of your body to the point where you're unable to move, unable to walk. And Doc, it had started to progress so much over that last year that it had taken over much of Doc's body. Doc had been dying, and he was dying for most of the time that I knew him. As February eventually came around, and continuing every couple months for the next 4.5 years, my friends and I would spend our Saturdays with Doc. We would always walk into the Niddles' living room on Southland Avenue that had become a beacon of education for me. See Doc's hospital bed right in the center there, and Doc would just greet us with a smile, mouth hello with our names, and we would just dive into conversation with them. Conversations on our hopes for the future, his hopes for the future, his hopes for us. Occasionally, Mrs. Niddle would break in and tell us about conversations that her and Doc had about ALS and the disease and what that meant for him and how his outlook on that has really improved his hope for the world and hope for the future. Some days were definitely easier than others. And on some of the hard days, we would just spend our Saturdays in the kitchen with Mrs. Niddle, having some tea, a biscuit, and supporting her and talking about our buddy and seeing what she may have needed throughout those moments. A lot of the times when we would go and talk to Doc, I would situate myself right next to his bed. And sometimes I would give him little glances and we would make subtle eye contact. And it was those moments that I was just mesmerized by, as this guy who was sitting there giving me a little wink and telling me it's okay. And it reminds me of Doc's never give up mentality and how he continued to fight. And it was clear that as Doc's battle with ALS was coming to a close, during one of our last visits, Mrs. Niddle went upstairs. And she came down with 4 ties, one for each of my friends and I. A tie that Doc once wore, and a tie that pointed out our personalities for Doc, his hopes for us, his hopes of what we would bring into the future, and how we can make sure that his memory continues to live on. And I think that's so important and so special. And in reading Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom, I want to read a quote that Mitch Albom describes when he talks about the memory of those who have gone before us. As long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without ever really going away. All the love you created is still there. All the moments are still there. You live on in the hearts of everyone you have touched and nurtured while you are here, and those with whom they interact. Death ends a life, not a relationship. And so for me, the only time I've worn that tie was on Doc's funeral. But every day when I wake up, I open my closet and look at the tie as a reminder of the hope to keep on going, as a reminder of the love that's in the world, and as a reminder of the sign and symbol of someone who had continued to fight and who had continued to go on. And so finding ways to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. I've always been someone that has been a little nerdy, a little shy, somewhat heavyset and overweight. And when I was in grad school, I spent a summer at St. Louis University. When I was at St. Louis University, I worked with their orientation program. And so part of working with their orientation program meant that I spent a lot of time alone that summer. Being able to be alone in the city kind of caused me to go with my thoughts and wrestle with some thoughts about what I wanted and kind of who I wanted to be and who I wanted to become. And so when I was alone, one day, I decided I wanted to go for a run. I have no idea what made me want to go for a run. And at that point, I was 160 pounds heavier than I am now. And so choosing to try to go for a run on a random day was something that for me was really unique and really interesting. But I had this pull within me. And so I went for a run around the campus of SLU. And I would go to choose routes that would dodge different people, and so that I could clearly go down a pathway when I couldn't be able to see anyone or when someone wouldn't be able to see me. And that continued maybe 3 or 4 times over that summer. I then returned to IU for grad school and for another year. And I had noticed that I had a lot of time when I was at SLU to be able to reflect on what I wanted out of life and who I wanted to become. And so when I got to IU, people started to mention to me that they started to notice that I looked a little bit more slim. And I had always tried weight loss journeys in my life, but every time I would try them, I would maybe lose 10 pounds to gain more than half of that back. And so it had always been a disheartening experience for me. And so I never noticed much of that in myself. And that continued on for that year, and that was the year of the Fitbit craze. And so when Fitbits were really big in individuals' lives. And I'm a competitive person, so I decided that I wanted to get a Fitbit and be able to count my steps each day. And so the campus of IU is a huge place. And so I decided to stop driving around campus and start walking around campus and counting those steps. And that continued on for the rest of that semester, and I felt that I had more energy, felt that my clothes fit me a lot better, and I eventually went home for Christmas that year. And at Christmas, my cousin Ryan pulled me aside and said that he was thinking of running the Cleveland Marathon in May. And so when Ryan said that he was going to run the Cleveland Marathon, he asked that if I wanted to run with him. He said I had gone through this journey of the last 6 months, and this was an opportunity to make a permanent change and to really prove to myself that I can do it. And I told Ryan, thanks, but no thanks, but one day I'll run a marathon, but that day isn't going to be that May. And so I went back to IU and was telling this to someone I was close with on my staff as we were doing laundry in the basement one day. And he perked up and said that he was thinking of running the Indianapolis half marathon that May. And he said that I should sign up to run it with him. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. This isn't quite something that I want to do, but like one day I really do want to run a race with you all, but that day is not anytime soon. And he looked me in the eye and said, Matt, believe in yourself. Stop making up excuses. You can do it. We can do it. We're going to do it together. And at that point, it clicked. This was Doc talking to me through other people, having this never give up, believe in yourself mentality. And I felt that Doc and God were trying to do something there, and I couldn't quite tell what. But I wanted to be along for the ride. So I ended up signing up for that half marathon. As we signed up, I had no idea what I was doing or how I would do it. The first time I had actually started to run or even ran was when I was at SLU for that internship. And so I was really starting from scratch, trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do. The only downside was that this was January in Indiana, and there was a polar vortex that winter. And so it was really cold outside. And I had never stepped foot into a gym because I was always self-conscious of what that meant and what other people might say about that. But when it's below freezing and you need to start half marathon training, I decided to go to the IU gym. And I walked into the gym, and it only called for a mile of running that day. And so I found the treadmill, and I ran in quarter-mile increments. When I ran a quarter mile, walked a quarter mile, ran, walked, until I finished a mile. And I continued on that journey for a couple days. Then I was so sore that I had to take a week off of training. But I didn't really get discouraged for that, because you know the moments and opportunities when you have a really hard workout, or you just exerted so much energy that you feel that muscle pain in such a good way. And so I took a couple days off and was reflecting on what that meant. When I was at Ignatius, I was introduced to this phrase, AMDG, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. AMDG has come to mean to me, we would have to write it on each of our papers when we were at Ignatius, at the top of our paper. And I had one theology professor who explained it in a way that was really meaningful for me. And he said, when you write AMDG on the top of your papers, it's supposed to mean that you're putting all of your effort into the work that you're doing and putting your all, and this is your best foot forward. And he said, if you ever don't want to write AMDG, we won't ask any questions, but just don't write it if this isn't your best work and if it's not how you truly believe. So naturally, I wrote AMDG everywhere, whether I needed to on a paper or not, and I did it through college and I did it through grad school. And for me, AMDG means so much more than just for the greater glory of God, and that's truly what it is. But for me, it's a reminder that I'm not alone. And during some of these moments that there might be struggles, I always whisper to myself, never give up, believe in yourself, AMDG. And so as I was training for that first half marathon, I was really nervous of what that would mean. I was nervous to run outside for fear of being heckled or people shouting at me and not quite sure what to do. And so throughout the training run, I think I managed to get to 7 miles when it called for 10 to 11 total miles for your long run. Yet we continued to go through that training, and whenever I needed a little boost of energy, and something that I still do today on tough days, I would say, never give up, believe in yourself, AMDG. And that gave me the boost of energy that I needed in those moments. The half marathon eventually approached. It was the night before, and I barely slept, and I was so nervous. Was I actually going to do this? I had never been to a race. I had never run a race. I wasn't quite sure what to do and what was going on. So I get to the start line at downtown Indianapolis and start to run. And I had gone into this with the mentality that I just wanted to run, I just wanted to finish the race. So I would run a mile, walk a mile, run a mile, walk a mile. And as I was going, I would see the crowds of people cheering. Some people with some of the most creative signs that I had ever seen. There were bands. One woman offered me an orange slice, taking stuff from strangers, running around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And I didn't really tell many people that I was going to be running that race. But as I got to mile 13 out of 13.1, I heard my name being shouted, and I looked over into the corner. And there were 5 of my friends from IU that were just standing there shouting, having a sign, and just saying, "Go, Matt, go." It was that moment that an ordinary moment turned extraordinary because of the community that I had with so many people. I had finished the race, and I had done something that I never thought would be possible, and that I never thought that I would be able to do. As I look back on some of those moments, I really wish that I would have believed in myself through some of that. And so I left IU and came to BC, and I didn't really run much when I first came to start working at BC 8 years ago, but I started to walk a lot. And I remember I went to my first Boston Marathon, seeing all the runners running down Commonwealth Avenue, seeing the joy, the pain, the determination, the triumphs, the sadness, the happiness, all with their different stories. And I remember posting a picture to Facebook or Instagram with the caption, "One day I hope to be running alongside some of these inspirational strangers. Never give up, believe in yourself, AMDG." And so for me, this is really what got me back into running, seeing them run and wanting to really be a part of that community. So I decided to sign up for my second half marathon. But this time I wanted to train a little bit harder. And so I trained a lot more, got to the start line, was still nervous as hell the night before, but there was something different about that experience. And I was able to run that whole half marathon. I PR'd as I was running, but it was continued to be a little reminder of all that was happening and all that's possible. For me, running had ended up turning into this thing that I ended up loving. Believing that I was able to do it, it turned into community and being with other people. So as COVID approached, it was really challenging, as I'm sure for many of you, the isolation and the loneliness that can come with some of those opportunities, or some of those during a pandemic. And so for me, I knew that running was what brought me community and what connected me with so many people. So in May of 2020, I connected a bunch of my friends from IU, from Loyola Chicago, from Ignatius, from Cleveland, from BC, and everywhere in between. And we did a May 2020 50-mile running challenge, where I think we had 30 or 40 people that I all challenged to run 50 miles throughout the month. And we tracked it on the Nike Running Plus app. And between the Nike Running Plus app and GroupMe, we created this community. And my people time ended up being time running with people, usually not in person, often over the phone and catching up and seeing how things were going. And it really was an opportunity to be able to see some of that community with running. And that really continued some of the weight loss and the fluctuation of exercising and running. And so one of my good friends told me that as we were continuing through that he thought that it was time for me to run a marathon. And I was like, nah, in true Razek fashion, nah, not for me. One day we'll do it, but like now it's not the time. And of course, no, you're going to do it. We're going to do it. You're going to do it. We're going to do it together. Let's sign up for this thing. And there it was again, this mentality from Doc and from them and from all others that were saying, like, you can do it. Why don't you just stop saying that you can't and believe in yourself? So we entered the Chicago Marathon Lottery and ended up getting a bib to run the Chicago Marathon last year. And training was fine during that time period. A lot of never give ups, believe in yourselves, AMDGs. But I was so nervous the night before that marathon that I barely ate all weekend. So I got to the start line, and every few miles I would run into individuals or see somebody that I knew, see a sign that I really thought was enjoyable or that I really laughed at, and would continue to run. And I ran into my cousin Ryan at mile 14, and he asked how things were going. And without even needing to answer, Ryan could just see in my eyes and see in my face that I needed help. And so he hopped in to help with me, run with me for the next 6.5 miles. For that 6.5 miles, Ryan ran with me, he walked with me, he chirped in my ear, and encouraged me to keep going. Then at mile 25, my dad and Ryan hopped in for about a quarter mile. And then at mile 26, I saw the brightest smile jumping up and down as I knew that I was about to finish the race. In those 5 hours, what got me through was this opportunity and these moments of being with others in community along a race. Father Michael Himes, in his book, Doing the Truth in Love, talks about the Holy Spirit. And Father Himes refers to the Holy Spirit as the Paraclete. And Paraclete is a Greek word. I did not know that at the time of reading it. And part of how he describes the Paraclete is they haven't found a good meaning for what that Paraclete can translate to in English. So I want to read what Father Himes says about Paraclete and how he describes it. Perhaps the closest we can get to the meaning of the word is the one who spurs runners on in a race. The Paraclete is like an athlete's trainer. The Paraclete stands on the side of the track and encourages the runners. You can do it. Go for it. Go for the gold. So, the Paraclete is the spur that drives us. This spirit offers us joy. And what joy it did offer as an opportunity to be with others in community, to motivate me to choose to run the Boston Marathon, and trying to build onto that same joy that Father Himes talks about runners in the crowd, just ordinary folks helping to turn moments extraordinary for me at those times. And so for each of us, the opportunity to find the extraordinary in the ordinary is all around us all the time. It's just a matter of putting it out there for ourselves and allowing ourselves to discover it and discover the beauty, the joy, the gifts that are all around us. Those that we bring to others, those that they bring to us, and those yet to be discovered. I know plenty of you in this room who do exactly that. Whether it's stopping on the side of the road to give someone a ride who needs to go where they're going, running a marathon in under 3 hours, advocating for your peers even when it's hard, playing a sport or coaching, being there and present with others, being able to go on a run with someone, being able to go in community with someone, or just to be the listening ear that someone needs you to be. You are all extraordinary in ways that you don't even realize. If you've ever been to my office, you know that it's a collection of memories for myself, but also memories that I have with people like you in this room. But what you might not notice is right behind my desk, I have 6 full binder clips of notes, of cards, of pictures, explaining words of encouragement, explaining words of thanks from students, from friends who have all been given to me. And those are the extraordinary moments and opportunities that someone may have just written something but don't realize the meaning that they have for me. Or a student who left a quote on my desk about 6 years ago from Maya Angelou. People might not always remember what you said or what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And it's these extraordinary moments for me that, whether it's a tie from a mentor, whether it's running in community with others, that truly push me and encourage me to go on. Being able to learn alongside each of you are some of those extraordinary moments as well. And so my hope for you is that you can find where these moments might exist in your own life, because they truly do. Because they do, and it's a message that as we reflect on this All Saints' Day, you might realize how extraordinary of a person that each of you are, and the impact that you can have on others, whether you realize it or not. So I hope that you can help point out for yourself and for them that the extraordinary is right here, right now, amongst each of us. Thank you.